Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing Bobbynot in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Let's play a French defense against Bobbynot, and we'll see how he treats the position here. Okay, I'm actually going to play a Winawer. Now, how to proceed, because c5 is the main line, but actually I'm kind of partial to a strategic line, which is b6 in this position. So I think I might play that. It's an interesting move. The idea is to play bishop a6 and get rid of the light square bishop, which in the French defense is a traditionally bad piece for black. Not many people know about this move either. I remember I lost a really bad game to Ilya Figler when I was maybe 2400 or so already, and I lost just a terrible game to him on the white side of this line. So this is always stuck in my head. Plays bishop d2, that's interesting. So he's trying to avoid a structural weakness. I might go knight e7, but knight e7 deprives me of the opportunity to retreat my bishop if I want. So maybe I should just play bishop a6 straight away instead. Yeah, let's do that. Let's just go bishop a6 without further delay. He'll probably take. And we can decide how to proceed from there. I haven't played many French defense games on this channel, and I'm trying to get a good mix of openings. The French is the third most popular defense to e4, behind the Sicilian and double king pawn e5. The French was famously called the most boring of all chess openings by one very strong player. Okay, a3. So I could take on c3. I would have to part with the bishop pair in doing so. I could also retreat my bishop. I think taking on c3 is by far the simplest move, so I'll do that. If he's going to be consistent, he'll take with his bishop. But his dark square bishop is not a particularly good piece anymore. Like, now I can just complete my development. And I don't think black has too many problems. He has a bishop compared to my knight, but I got rid of my worst piece, which is the light square bishop. I can still play for c5 later if I want, undermine his central structure. I'm happy with the result of the opening so far. Let's check Bobbynot's statistics while we have a second. So peak 5-minute or 15-minute rating of 1881 for him. 326 wins, 267 losses. So f4, he's reinforcing his center. I do have the option of knight f5 now, which I might take. Knight f5 would kind of hit the e3 square. I mean, I don't know that knight e3 is a threat, but I'm also threatening queen h4 check in some cases. If I play knight f5, he'll probably respond knight f3 though. Just play it cool and cover h4. So maybe I don't want to commit to that move yet. Maybe I should play for c5 first. Maybe castle first, knight f3, and then c5 is a better move order. Let's do that. That just looks more flexible. He could play a queen move like queen e2 or queen d3 to hit my knight here. I could always play queen c8 to guard that knight. It's not even out of the question sometimes to play knight b8 because the knight will probably have to be repositioned from a6 anyways. So I can opt for that plan later if I want. So let's just go for c5 now. I would expect him to castle, and then I can maybe play knight f5. It might have a little more emphasis now that knight e3 would be a threat in that position. Yeah, this bishop is not a happy piece, just based on his pawn structure. Okay, so he does play queen e2 and attack the knight. Two options, knight b8 or queen c8. I could go knight c7 as well, but that's not really the route for the knight that I'm too thrilled about. Because where can it go after that? b5 is covered by his queen. b8 is a more productive square because I'm going to c6. So I think I will go knight b8. Yeah, let's do that. I could also take on d4 and then bring the knight to c5. That's kind of interesting too. I want to keep the tension for a little bit though and see if I can derive some advantage from that. So assuming he castles, I'll play knight bc6. He'd much rather have his pawn on c3 and his bishop elsewhere, like outside of the pawn chain, because his bishop is just operating as a big pawn in this position. It doesn't have a tremendously useful function on its current square. And taking on c5 just allows me to strengthen my center. I get to capture with the b pawn towards the center. Keeping the tension enables me to even pursue a queenside plan if I want. Like I could play for c4, b5, a5, b4. It takes a long time, though. I probably won't do that. This is an aggressive move. He's denying me the use of the f5 square. So in that respect, it makes sense. I could go knight g6 now to attack the pawn on f4. Because if his knight were to move so the rook can defend the pawn, then d4 would hang. But knight g6 I think will probably be met by just a move like queen e3. So maybe rook c8 is a better option, just patient. I'm not yet worried about these advancing pawns because I'm very solid on the king side. Plays rook a e1 and he played it pretty quickly too. Knight g6 will again be met by queen e3, I'm guessing. Taking on d4. If I do that, he might take with the bishop. It's hard to say. c4 is also tempting, albeit very slow. If I play c4, I destroy the pressure on his center. I no longer have that for myself. So his knight might be able to move and allow him to threaten f5. So that's why I'm leaning towards a capture. Or I could just play a move like queen d7 in this position. But that doesn't achieve too much. So c takes d4, bishop takes d4, let's say. Knight takes d4, knight takes d4, rook c4, attacking his knight. He can play c3. I do have knight c6 then. We could trade. No real advantage in that position for me. It's pretty simplified. I don't want to trade off all the minor pieces. I'd rather keep some stuff on the board for a bit. If I play c4, it would mean I'm very confident in my ability to defend on the king side. But I fear that if this knight moves, f5 will be right up in my face. I might play queen d7 just because I'm curious how he's going to develop his position. Okay, I think I'm going to do this. I'm curious if he'll play for h4 or whether he'll make some waiting move, like, I don't know, king g2 or something. And I think I'll have the option of taking on d4 still, so I'm not like losing the ability to capture there. Because he won't take on c5. I would love it if he did take on c5. I'd get to take back with my pawn, and d4 would be an issue. So I'm trying to play off the fact that he will never take me, but I always have the option of taking him or pushing past. So you're seeing one very classical way to undermine the center in the French by attacking the pawn on d4. Another way is to play f6 and attack the head of the pawn chain, the e5 pawn. Here my position is less suited to that because he's doubled up on the e file. So if f6 and he takes, e6 will be kind of weak. Granted, now that I have my queen on d7, I have one defender, and if, let's say, f6, e takes f6, rook takes f6 happens, I would have my rook defending that pawn as well, and I would be attacking f4. So it is something I'll keep in mind. I probably still won't play it. But if I decide that the capture on d4 isn't leading too much, I might go for this. I think it's good for him that he's taking time. He's slowed down a little bit. He's played fairly quickly up till this point. He's made all of the standard moves. Now's the time to find a plan. Wow. So the move that I said he wouldn't play, he actually does play. Now I'm happy that I waited to take on d4 or not. Okay, I'll take back. My only other possibility was d4, but that didn't look like the timing was right for that move. So I understand that he opens his bishop up a little bit, but I think this move is pretty bad. D takes c5. Knight h4, so pretty clearly he's going for f5. That's the only reason you play such a move. I could play knight g6, that would be interesting. And then if takes, maybe take with the f-pawn to forestall this advance. Sort of like the look of that. I'm also thinking about d4, just attacking his bishop. But d4, bishop back to d2, not sure. Not sure it does too much. I could play c4 then, though. And if queen takes c4, I have knight takes e5, discovered attack on his queen. Let's go knight g6. I think this move's a little bit better. And I will take away from the center. So with the f-pawn on g6, if he does capture, because I want to fortify the f5 square, I don't want him advancing f5 for free, as would happen if I took with the h-pawn instead. He might play queen f2 in this position. If he's not happy about allowing me to take with my f-pawn, he might do that. Or he might play knight g2, just retreating. If knight g2, the threat of f5 might be renewed, because he does have 3 defenders of this pawn and I only have 2 attackers. But I could play d4 and block out his bishop. I just have this feeling he's going to play queen f2, defending his knight and kind of eyeing c5 too. If he does play queen f2, I'll probably play d4 then. I suppose I can always bring my c knight back to e7 too, if I need another defender of the f5 square. He does play queen f2. Yeah, so I'm thinking d4 is the way to go. Just block out his bishop, so we're establishing pawns on dark squares. Now it's unclear like what his threat is, if anything, because if he pushes f5, I could take on e5 with my knight. So I'm thinking maybe queen d5 is a good move right here. I like the look of it. Centralize the queen. Maybe I can bother him with a queen a2 move later. Makes a good deal of sense. Let's do that. I'll still take with my f-pawn if he decides to capture. I'm not worried about e6 being weak because he can scarcely ever get at that pawn. He's got something of a dilemma. He really wants to play f5, but it doesn't really work tactically. I mean, I guess he could try it as a pawn sacrifice, but I doubt the soundness of that move. Okay, so he just retreats his knight. Maybe h4 is the idea now. He's going to try to crowd me. Now I kind of want to play f6 myself and open the position. That would be very interesting. So I alluded to the f6 move earlier. And now that he's somewhat stalled his own attack by going knight h4 and coming back, I'm emboldened to play this move. Let's say f6, e takes f6, rook takes f6. I'm attacking f4 twice. He might play knight g5, but I have h6 if I need it. Or just doubling the rooks. Probably doubling the rooks is best. Let's do f6. This is interesting. My rook on f8 is x-raying his queen. So opening the file could lead to tactical opportunities based on that. Also, it makes it so that he can't play h4, h5 comfortably. I'm distracting him from doing that by attacking his center. Let's pre-move this move. Plays queen g3 instead. I'll probably take on e5 against this, but I'm not sure yet. Yeah, I think capturing is a good idea. Open the file. I have both my knights covering this square, so he's going to end up with a pawn on e5. Either pawn takes right away or knight takes first, maybe. If he takes with the knight, I'll probably take with my c knight. I'd rather keep my g knight in the vicinity of my king. And my c knight doesn't really have a whole lot to do at the moment. It's not going to a5, that's covered by the bishop, so I'd rather exchange that one than my g knight. My g knight's also a little restricted, but it's more in the vicinity that I'm operating on. Also, taking with the c knight would allow me to go c4. Takes with a pawn, actually. Now I could sack the exchange if I wanted on f3. That would be very interesting. Albeit unsound, perhaps. Maybe I can go just rook f7 and double up the rooks and attack f3. It's an active way of playing it. Another idea I had is queen c4 to attack c2. Distract him that way. Should I play rook f7 or rook c7? May not matter a whole lot, but I feel like rook f7 is more accurate. Let's do that. Clear idea. Just double up against his knight. I'm going to try to punish him for having taken with the pawn on e5 rather than the knight. I think he should have taken with the knight because now the knight is just tied to the defense of the e5 pawn. So I can attack the knight multiple times, which is in turn defending that pawn. It might compel him to just play knight g5 or something, because I don't know how he deals with rook cf8 on the next move. Playing a move like king g2 is really ugly. I suppose he could play rook e2, and then when I double, he doubles up in defense. But that is very passive. Also, his e5 pawn loses a defender then. That's right. So if rook e2, rook cf8, rook ef2, I can take on e5, and I'm winning a clean pawn. The weaknesses in his position are coming to the fore now. Hard to find a move. I mean, he'd also like to knock my queen off balance too because it's so strong on d5, but there's no convenient way to do that because he doesn't have c4. Time-wise, we're doing okay. And he does play knight g5, so kind of gets frustrated by having to defend the pawn and just decides to give it up. Okay, let's take on f1. And after he takes back, I'll have a choice of which way to take on e5. I think I'll take with the c knight. I could also play h6 first. But taking with the c knight seems best. Or do I want to take with the g knight? Maybe g knight's better. Because g knight, h4 loses its sting. If I take with the c knight, h4, h6, he might have h5. If I take this way and he goes queen h4, queen h3, I can always play h6. So it's not a problem. Then again, if I take with the g knight, I lose a defender of f8. I can also take with the queen, too. On top of all this. Maybe h6. Let's go h6 before making a decision. I'm just not entirely sure which knight I should take with or with the queen. But I feel like I'm going to have to kick this knight back soon anyways. So once again, we'll exercise some flexibility. My knight is now undefended on g6, but The only way he can get at it immediately is queen d3, to which I can answer that with just a capture on e5, defending the knight. I wouldn't want to take with this knight because of queen h7 mate. So queen d3, knight c takes e5 would be the answer. Okay, this move is interesting. Just thinking he might try that. Maybe rook f8. How's he getting out? Through d6, but that's horrible. Yeah, let's go rook f8. He wouldn't want to have to play queen f2 right now. If queen f2, I'm just playing knight c takes e5 and attacking the knight, and he's pinned. And if knight takes h6 check, g takes h6 at that point, my knight on g6 will defend my rook. So he pretty much has to play knight d6 now, I think. Or sack on h6, which will be bad. He's not going to get enough compensation for that. I think I'm going to pre-move rook takes f1. Just because if he goes knight d6, that's the move I'm going to play. And on any other knight move, it wouldn't matter that I pre-moved rook takes f1. He can play knight takes h6, but in that case my pre-move wouldn't work. It wouldn't be allowed. Yeah, he's in big trouble in this position. Probably should have retreated his knight to h3 or f3, but in those cases he just loses the e5 pawn for insufficient compensation. So let's say knight d6, I take on f1, he takes with his king. I have the ability to play queen h1. But more than likely I'll take on e5 first, because that attacks his knight again. So let's say knight c takes e5. His knight has to flee somewhere. It can't go through b5 because I would have queen c4 check then, because his king would be on f1 and his knight would be on e5 on b5. So that would be a fork. Yeah, there's just nothing doing for him in this position. He does take on h6. Okay, so I'll take. He'll probably play rook takes f8 first.
Check.
I can take with my king or the knight. Doesn't matter too much. Let's just take with a king. He'll take an h6 with check, and I think I'll go king g8. I could go towards the center too, but
check.
This seems a little safer. I don't know though. They're pretty equivalent. Let's go this way. I was just somewhat concerned that if he goes if I go king e8, he might be able to swing his queen over to b5 or something, like queen d3, hit my knight, go to b5, but it's a minor concern. Okay, so he's not really threatening to come in anywhere. I guess queen f6 is maybe a threat. Very slightly. I can defend in that case. So if I take with the c knight, queen f6, and I have queen d7 if needed. Maybe taking with the queen is easiest. But if I take with the queen, he'll play h4, just to make it somewhat messy. Okay, let's take this way. Then after queen f6, I'll play queen e to d7. And then the plan is queen f7, just to fully dissolve his play. He has to play queen f6 now. There's no other move that gives him anything. If he doesn't do that, I'm coming into f3 with my knight or queen. Yeah, and I'll do this move. Guard the checkmate and plan queen f7. I think now he pretty much has to play h4. And if h4, I have queen e7 too. That's nice. Queen e7 might even be cleaner than queen f7. Yeah, I think it is. His pawns are going to get stalled now. Yep, looks good. Everything's safe. If he retreats his queen, he could lose h4. Pre-move this. And then I'm attacking g4 after the trade. If he goes g5, I have knight f5. That just wins on the spot, practically. Or knight f3 check and take the pawn on h4. Either one. Nothing to be done for him. If he trades queens and then plays bishop g5, again, I have knight f3 check and take on g5. Or I could just move this knight somewhere, but many lines will win. And he's trying for something, but there's no counterplay to be had. Looking back on this game, I'm amazed that that decision on move 14, queen d7, I'm amazed that that provoked him to play c5. Because that was a very committal decision that just basically lost him the game. That might be a little harsh to say it lost him the game, but it made it extremely difficult for him. This is an easy cleanup job. Just go take his pawns. He's bringing his king up to f4, but we always have this e-pawn that can go at any moment. So I can play knight c4 too. It's probably the easiest move. Attacks his pawns. Just go take this guy. Now my d-pawn's ready to go. And he resigned. Okay, let's have a look. So we played the Winawer variation, which when I was an e4 player regularly, I always had trouble against the Winawer. I never liked facing this line. And it's well known that Bobby Fischer had a pretty bad record against this line too. So e5 is the main move. A pretty simple system, by the way, if you're looking for something for white. I've recommended this system to a couple students of mine. Just take on d5, e takes d5, and then bishop d3. With one of the plans being queen f3, h3, knight ge2 as a way to develop. That avoids almost all of the Winawer theory. I don't think this line gives white a huge edge or anything, but it leads to a playable position, and you get positions that are simpler to play. The main lines of the Winawer can become complex very quickly, tactically or strategically, or both. It's one of the principal drawbacks of knight c3 on move 3, because the Tarrasch variation, knight d2, doesn't allow bishop b4, since the bishop would just be rebuffed by c3. So bishop b4, e5, now b6. So c5 is the main line, and after a3, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, there's a massive theory. So I didn't really want to go in for that, so I played b6, which is just a way to try to exchange the light square bishops, very simply. And I vividly remember that game against Ilya Figler that I lost, where even though I outrated my opponent by about 100 points, it seemed like he just effortlessly equalized in this line, and I had a bad position. I think it went something like a3. I'm not sure this move is best for white.
Check.
Take, bishop a6. Bishop takes, knight takes. Then eventually he was able to maneuver this knight into the c4 square. I think he actually did that maneuver I was discussing, knight b8 to c6 to a5, and then eventually here. And I was strategically busted in about 20 moves. So b6, bishop d2, bishop a6. So with bishop d2, he avoids the structural problems, but you can see that it wasn't one-way traffic when his bishop ends up on c3, because this is a bad piece, there's no doubt about it. And black was just able to exchange a good piece, or a poor piece, the light square bishop. Knight e7, f4. f4 is understandable. The only problem is it puts another pawn on a dark square, so that bishop is really looking sketchy now. Let's start the engine roundabout here. Knight f5 was another move I was considering, just because it eyes the e3 square and kind of menaces this, but he'll play knight f3, and he covers h4, and knight e3 is not good in view of this move. Loose knights. So I figured let's wait to play that. So I castled, and then played c5. Yeah, the engine already thinks black is doing pretty well here. Maybe taking on d4 did deserve attention, because then I can jump my knight right into c5. And maybe I can get into the e4 square. I didn't look to see if I could get into the e4 square or not. I didn't really think about that. I just saw c5 and that was it. I saw that c6 might be slightly weak for me. But no, this is nice. This is a nice position for black. I can more easily cover c6 than they can cover e4. So one square is a outpost supported by a pawn, and the other one's just a semi-weak square deep in your own position. So maybe knight b8 was a little extravagant. You can see it doesn't affect the evaluation too much. The computer wants to go long in this position. Interesting. Yeah, that would have made it more dynamic. Given that the strategic trend is in black's favor, it might make sense for him to castle long, because when you have a worse position strategically, you have to compensate by playing dynamically and creating imbalances. Because if you have a worse strategic position, it stands to reason that if you continue playing normally, your position will not improve, and it'll probably just get worse because your opponent has the strategic advantages. So it's like a scale. It's a balancing act. You have to compensate one way or the other, depending upon if you're dynamically better or strategically better, or dynamically worse or strategically worse. So here, putting pressure on d4. He played the aggressive g4 move, which makes a lot of sense, though. I mean, the king side is where white's play will be at in this position. He's not going to be better on the queen side or in the center. So it makes sense that he wants to push. It's kind of a weakening move. Like f4 becomes weak, his king gets opened up. Rook c8. He played rook ae1 pretty quickly. I wasn't sure that that was the best square for the rook necessarily, but it's consistent with his setup. Now queen d7. Yeah, this move took me a while. I probably spent a little bit too long for a neutral-looking move like that. I spent 2 minutes. But I wasn't happy with the immediate c takes d4. I just thought they would take with the bishop, and I didn't really see what I was getting out of this. So, as so often happens when I've played lower-rated players on this channel, making moves that puts the ball in their court pays dividends, because it gives them more of a chance to go wrong. You give your opponents a wider selection of moves. This is something I've been talking about for quite a while in videos. Like actually, one of the first video series I did, it was on chess.com back in, I think, 2011 or so. I did a 3-part series called Sensing the Critical Moment. And one major piece of advice that I tried to illustrate in that series was exactly this, giving your opponent options to go wrong. If you have a choice between a banal move like c takes d4, which really just compels a capture. I mean, he's only got 2 good moves, and he's probably going to find bishop takes d4, which is the best capture, I think. When you have a choice between that or a move like queen d7, which gives him a whole host of options, and you think that they might be like roughly equal in value, well, of course you should play queen d7. Doubly so if you're the stronger player. So, queen d7, and he took. I really don't like that decision. The computer thinks it's okay, but I think he should hold out here. I've just played a neutral move, and I'm not strengthening my resolve to take on d4 by playing this move. I'm just trying to connect my rooks and maybe reinforce f5. Now, I'm surprised the computer likes this. If it were me playing white, I'd probably lean towards a move like maybe h4. Although h4 could run into problems with knight g6. Let's say a move like king g2, maybe a waiting move himself. I think that would be more resolute. But I don't know. I might be criticizing him too much for this move. It seems like a concession to me. Now I have this nice pawn duo in the center. His bishop is not opened up that much more because this pawn on e5 is not going to be moving soon. Okay, so it wants to play a pretty radical idea, b4. That did not cross my mind at all. I'm pretty confident it didn't cross his mind either. I guess the idea of that move is to try to wrest control of d4 away. Still gives a pretty healthy advantage to black, though. What if I play d4 here? Bishop d2? Yeah, that's antithetical to how he's played this position, going b4 here. The main line the engine was giving was c takes b4, a takes b4, now this move, a5. And after b takes a5, playing knight takes a5, point being that bishop takes a5 runs into queen a7 check, forking the king and bishop. Black will probably retain a small edge. He's got a better pawn structure. White has a weak c-pawn. So he played knight h4. I went knight g6. And then queen f2, yeah. Seems he maybe should take on g6, even though it allows me to take with my f-pawn. This would have been instructive if this had happened, because this is a case where you're justified in taking away from the center. In doing so, I slightly weaken my e-pawn, but he can't get at that. And most importantly, in my mind, I open the f-file and I fortify f5. So I would not have minded him doing this at all. But he played queen f2, and I played d4. What does the computer want me to play instead? Knight takes h4, queen takes h4, then d4. Bishop d2, queen d5. So similar to the game, except I release the tension and capture on h4 right away. Let's compare that to the game continuation. Still wants him to take on g6, but somehow with queen f2, I think he's made up his mind not to take on g6, because if he were to do it now, it's almost like I get an x-ray down the file for free. So that doesn't look appetizing for white. So here, I played queen to d5, just a useful centralization move. Knight f3. Now f6. I like this move a lot during the game. I mean, we're getting somewhat low on time. I've spent half my time, and I guess he has a decent amount still, but he's getting there. And I felt like the initiative had shifted over to my favor, and that his kingside attack had stalled for a moment, but I didn't want to give him a chance to renew it with h4, h5, kicking my knight away from g6. He's temporarily given up on the plan of f5, but h4, h5 could lead to some trouble for me. I don't want to get totally swamped by the pawn, so if I'm going to play f6, now is a great time to do it. He went here, okay. So the engine just says take the pawn, let black take with the rook, and attack f4, and prepare to double. Seek counterplay somehow, knight g5. I guess coming to e4 if I play h6. What if I just play rook cf8, let's say? Queen g2, okay, and e6 becomes slightly weak. So better to play knight takes f4. That's interesting. And if bishop takes, then e5. Don't know if I would have seen that in the game. Hard to say. Queen h4, attacking h7, now h6, and black will emerge with a small advantage. Knight h3, take, knight takes, queen f7, okay. Equal material, but the engine says black's a little bit better. I guess because his king is kind of open still and mine's pretty safe. He still has some pawn weaknesses too, g4 and c2. But he played queen g3. I thought he should take with a knight here. It may not matter a whole lot, but when he takes with the f-pawn, his knight is now tied down to the defense of this. I went rook f7 in reply. Seems like a good move. I think rook c7 is very similar, trying to swing over. Here, and now knight g5.
Check.
I take on f1. He takes. So here, yeah, I spent a little time. Again, not sure I should spend a minute deciding what to do in this position, but I saw certain drawbacks of any capture on e5, mainly involving the f file. So like if I were to take with the g knight, I didn't like the fact that he can come here, and it prevents me from playing rook f8 and such. Oops. But I think h6 is a good way to at least make him choose what to do with this knight before I capture. And he should go knight f3, yeah, just retreat. Whereupon I can take this pawn whenever I want, or play rook f8 and pump up the pressure. This pawn is a sitting duck. Instead, he played the knight into f7, but yeah, after rook f8, his options are not good. Queen f2 would just, as I said, lead to disaster after knight c takes e5. Attacking his knight again, and a discovery like this is not going to work because my knight covers f8. And if knight d6 in this position, I was looking at this line, and now I think just taking here. Yeah, and I saw that if the knight comes here, this is an undefended piece. He has an open king. We have queen c4 check, picking up the loose piece. Because loose pieces drop off, as we know. And other options like knight e8 or knight c8, I mean, they're not good. He's going to lose. He's down a pawn, his king's open, he has no coordination. So I can't blame him for taking on h6, because under the circumstances, he didn't have any choice, really. At least this way he gets to create some threats. I think taking on f8 with the king or the knight is fine. I just chose king because I wanted this knight here, assisting in the attack on e5. Yeah, I think realistically black can go either way. King e8 was the move I was first thinking about, but I don't know, queen d3, and I thought, well, if I take this way, he has queen d5 check, and maybe I'll have to make some accurate king moves to hide, but this is pretty trivially winning, too. So I went this way, and he tried to set up a threat on g7, but it's not going to work. Queen d7, and we've got everything covered. He does have bishop f4, I looked at that for a second. And if knight takes, he can take this knight on e5. He's attacking this, and maybe queen b8. But looks like black has everything covered. I might have to be somewhat cautious about his pawns advancing, but as you can see, it's still winning. So h4. I just went queen e7, ultra safe move. The computer says the fancy knight takes h4 is better, because no matter which knight he takes, I have a fork on f3. Forking his king and queen. But even though knight takes h4 is the best move according to the engine, if you were playing this position as black, you shouldn't feel at all bad that you didn't play knight takes h4 or didn't even look at it, because queen e7 is winning in a much safer fashion. So when you're winning, you have to play the winning line that makes sense to you, not what the computer says. So here. Yeah, and now he's just losing his pawns or getting his bishop trapped, or both, basically. Advanced his attack pawn, and knight f5, I think, is an easy way to win it. So, good strategic game, I think. A lot of psychological discussion, especially centering around his decision to take on c5. I don't think he played too bad in the opening. This line didn't lead to any edge for white, but he was holding his own all the way up through, yeah, I'd say right around here. I mean, this is a position. The computer gives some edge to black, but I think that's mainly a function of his bishop being on an awkward square. This is a good line for black. I think it's pretty effective. And if you care to learn it, look up some games in this variation. I believe Bobbynot played this line on occasion. He was a proponent of the French defense. And it takes the game away from a lot of the mainstream theory with c5, which produces some pretty irrational positions a lot of times. So I hope you guys enjoyed this 15-minute game. I'll be back tomorrow with another 15-minute game. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.